They told me my land was unused. Like that word alone was enough to make it theirs. And for a minute there, I almost let them believe it. I didn't even hear it from them first. That's the part that still makes me shake my head. I heard it from Dale, my neighbor on the west side, the kind of guy who knows everyone's business but pretends he doesn't. He leaned over our old split-rail fence one evening while I was watering the tomatoes and said, real casual, "Hey, Mason, you sell the back strip yet?" I laughed. I actually laughed. "Sell what?" He squinted past me toward the tree line. "That stretch behind your field. Figured you made a deal with the new folks." I told him no, I hadn't sold a thing, hadn't talked to a soul about it. He nodded slow, said, "Huh," and went back to his yard like he hadn't just tossed a grenade into my evening. The next morning I understood. I walked out back with my coffee like I do every day, same old boots, same quiet stretch of sky, and there they were. Survey stakes. Bright pink flags fluttering in a straight, confident line across the rear of my property. Not random, not exploratory, precise, like somebody had already made a decision for me and just forgot to include me in the meeting. I stood there longer than I want to admit. The steam from my mug curled up into the cool air, and I just stared at those flags cutting across my field like a scar. I own just over 4 acres outside a town called Briar Glen. Bought it 15 years ago, back when it was still mostly farmland and a couple of tired barns. Long, narrow lot. The house sits up front near the road, and the back slopes gently into a low field that floods a little in spring and dries out by midsummer. It's not glamorous land. It's not manicured. I don't build on it. I don't farm it regularly. I let it breathe. Apparently that made it unused. Behind my property used to be open pasture. Then 2 years ago a development went up almost overnight. 60 houses in neat little rows, beige and gray and navy blue, every lawn trimmed within an inch of its life. The kind of place where trash cans disappear by 7 a.m. and grass height is practically a moral issue. They called it Willow Trace. Had a stone entrance, fake rustic sign, American flags at the corner, and an HOA. I followed the line of stakes that morning all the way across the back edge of my field. 12 feet in from my boundary fence. 12 feet, the entire length. I knew that number without measuring because I'd memorized my survey when I bought the place. That strip wasn't accidental. It was intentional. When I got back inside, I pulled up Willow Trace's website. There it was under Community Enhancements. A walking path, decorative lighting, benches every few hundred feet. They called it a green corridor, designed to promote wellness and connection with nature. The digital rendering showed it running right along the rear of the neighborhood. Through my land. I drove over there that afternoon. The HOA office sat in a clean little brick building near the entrance. Soft instrumental music playing inside, framed photos of smiling families and golden retrievers on the walls. It smelled faintly like vanilla candles. The woman at the desk, late 40s maybe, tidy hair, pastel cardigan, looked up and gave me a professional smile. "Hi there, how can I help you?" "My name's Mason Caldwell. I live behind Phase 2. I'm here about the survey stakes in my field." She blinked once, like she needed a second to place me. Then she smiled again, softer this time. "Oh yes, the corridor project." "Corridor project," I repeated. "It's just along the back edge," she said gently, folding her hands on the desk. "You don't really do anything with it. I let that sit between us. We filed the plan with the city months ago," she continued. "It's going to increase surrounding property values. It'll be beautiful. Benches, native plants, walking space for families." "Who approved it?" I asked. "It's filed," she said again, like that word meant ownership. "Filed isn't owned." I didn't raise my voice, didn't pound on her desk. I just nodded, said, "I'll look into it," and walked out. Back home, I dug through my old file cabinet and pulled out the survey from when I bought the property. Clean lines, clear boundaries, documented and stamped. The back line sat exactly where it always had. No easement, no shared access, no public right-of-way. I walked out to the field again as the sun dipped low. The flags glowed pink in the golden light. I tried to be reasonable. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone assumed. Maybe they thought the land was abandoned or that I wouldn't care. But here's the thing about assumptions. They're comfortable for the person making them. I grew up watching my dad lose a piece of his property because he didn't want to make waves. A utility company pushed a line through the corner of our land, and he figured fighting it would cost too much time, too much money, too much stress. It's just a little strip, they told him. And once it was gone, it was gone. Standing there in my field, I could hear his voice in my head telling me to stay calm, to be practical. But I also remembered the look on his face years later when he realized calm and practical had cost him something he couldn't get back. They thought my land was unused. They thought unused meant available. I went inside that night and sat at the kitchen table long after the house went quiet. I could have hired a lawyer, sent a formal letter, threatened a lawsuit, and maybe I still would have if it came to that. But what bothered me wasn't just the trespassing. It was the tone. The way that woman said, "You don't really do anything with it. Like value only counts if it's visible, if it's landscaped and curated and stamped with approval." So instead of stopping them, I started thinking about how to make them see it. By the end of that week, I had a plan forming in my head. Not angry, not reckless, just deliberate. If they believed unused meant unclaimed, I was about to show them exactly how wrong they were. That Saturday, I rented equipment. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just practical tools that said work instead of war. A compact tractor with a tiller attachment, a small grading blade, irrigation tubing coiled up in the bed of my old pickup. The rental guy, Trevor, looked at the address and whistled. "You starting a farm back there, Mason?" "Something like that," I said. He didn't ask more. Small towns are good about that. They let you have your reasons. By mid-morning, I was out in the field. The engine hummed under me as I drove slow, deliberate passes across the back 12 feet. The soil had been left alone for years, thick with stubborn grasses and wild growth. The first time the tiller bit into it, the whole machine shuddered. It felt almost ceremonial, like breaking ground for something bigger than crops. I kept my pace steady. Not rushed. Not angry. Just thorough. About an hour in, I noticed movement along the tree line behind Willow Trace. A couple of residents had gathered, hands on hips, watching. One of them lifted a phone, maybe recording, maybe just texting about the crazy guy tearing up his own land. Good. By Sunday afternoon, that unused strip looked very used. Freshly turned soil, leveled clean, irrigation lines running in neat rows. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't landscaped. It was functional, intentional. I'd spent most of the week researching crops that grew fast, tall, and thick. Nothing decorative, nothing symmetrical. I ordered seeds that spread wide and didn't care how they looked from a distance. Corn along the center rows, pole beans that would climb and tangle, squash that crawled outward with big, unruly leaves. The kind of growth that says this space has a purpose, even if that purpose isn't aesthetic. Monday morning I planted. Kneeling in that soil, pressing seeds into the earth, I felt something settle in my chest. I wasn't just reacting. I was reclaiming. There's a difference. Reaction is loud. Reclaiming is quiet and stubborn. By Wednesday, I put up signs. Private agricultural property. No trespassing. Active cultivation in progress. Authorized personnel only. And one more, in smaller print. Organic pesticide application ongoing. That last one wasn't a lie. I plan to use organic treatments if needed. But the phrase alone tends to make suburban walkers think twice about bringing their golden retrievers through. The effect was almost immediate. Thursday morning my phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Caldwell?" A man's voice asked, clipped and professional. "Yes. This is Brad Mercer, president of the Willow Trace Homeowners Association. We need to discuss what you're doing along the rear boundary." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm using my land." There was a pause. "You appear to be obstructing a planned community pathway. Your planned pathway runs through my property." "We filed those plans with the city months ago," he said, like I hadn't heard that already. "And I've owned that land for 15 years, I replied. Another pause, longer this time. "Could we meet?" We agreed to talk that afternoon. Brad showed up in a pressed polo shirt with the Willow Trace logo embroidered over the chest, khaki pants, clipboard tucked under his arm. He had the kind of tan that suggests scheduled outdoor time, not accidental sun. He stopped a few feet short of the newly turned soil, looking down at the irrigation lines like they offended him personally. "What exactly are you growing?" he asked. "Food," I said. He gave a tight smile. "Is this a temporary demonstration?" I couldn't help it. I laughed a little. "You think I rented a tractor for a demonstration?" "We're trying to create something beneficial for the broader community," he said, voice smoothing out like he was back in a board meeting. "Walking space. Family access. It increases everyone's property values." "Everyone's?" I asked. "Because it decreases mine." He shifted his weight. It's only 12 feet. It's only 12 feet, I repeated. Along the entire length of my property. He glanced at the signs. You understand the city has already reviewed the corridor proposal. I understand that file isn't owned, I said. And my survey hasn't changed. He scribbled something on his clipboard, jaw tight. We'll be contacting the city. Please do. That weekend, the beans started sprouting. There's something almost poetic about watching green shoots break through soil that someone else thought was worthless. By the second week, thin stalks of corn were standing upright in neat rows, and the squash leaves were spreading wide like they owned the place. Which they did. The HOA did contact the city. 2 officials came out the following Tuesday. One older guy named Harris, one younger woman named Lila who looked like she still believed in procedure. They walked the line with me, measuring tape in hand. Do you have an agricultural permit? Harris asked. For what? I said. Planting crops on agricultural zone land. He checked his notes. This parcel is zoned rural residential with agricultural allowance. Exactly. They asked about water usage. I showed them my well documentation. They asked about chemicals. I handed over receipts for organic treatments, all approved for small-scale cultivation. They asked if I intended to sell produce commercially. Not unless I want to, I said. Right now I'm growing food. Lila looked at the signs, then back at me. You're within your rights. Harris nodded slowly. As far as zoning goes, there's no violation. Brad wasn't there that day, but I could imagine the email he received afterward. No violation. No infraction. No leverage. Still, the tension didn't fade. Residents from Willow Trace started walking along their side of the tree line more often. I'd see them in the evenings, hands shading their eyes as they looked over the growing crops. A couple of kids tried to duck under the fence once, curious more than malicious. I walked over, calm but firm. Hey, I called. This is private property. One of the moms hurried over, flustered. They just wanted to see. I get that, I said. But it's not a park. She looked past me at the rows of corn. It used to be open. It still is, I said. Just not for everyone. That's when it hit me. For them, this wasn't about stealing land. It was about expectation. The development had been marketed as backing up to open green space. Peaceful views. Nature access. Somewhere along the line, open had morphed into communal. And I was the inconvenient fact in the middle of that assumption. One evening Dale came over with a 6-pack and leaned against the fence again, watching the plants sway in the breeze. You're really going through with it, he said. Yep. He took a sip. They're not used to someone pushing back. I'm not pushing, I said. I'm planting. He chuckled. You know what I mean. By the 3rd week, the corn was knee-high. The beans were climbing their supports. The squash leaves sprawled thick and wide. Exactly the kind of messy, unapologetic growth that doesn't fit neatly into a developer's brochure. And then something unexpected happened. A few of the Willow Trace residents started slowing down when they walked near the fence. Instead of glaring, some of them asked questions. What are you growing? How long does corn take? Do you actually eat all that? I answered when they were respectful. I ignored them when they weren't. But Brad wasn't done. One late afternoon, just as the sun dipped low and the field glowed gold, he showed up again. No clipboard this time. Just tension. This isn't over, he said quietly. I looked out at the rows of green stretching behind me. It doesn't have to be, I replied. His jaw tightened. The community was promised that corridor. Then whoever promised it shouldn't have. He stared at me for a long moment, like he was recalculating something. Maybe he'd assumed I'd cave. Maybe he thought a few polite conversations and a little pressure would do the trick. Instead, every day the crops grew taller. And every day, that 12-foot strip looked less like an oversight and more like what it always was. Mine. By midsummer, you couldn't see through that strip anymore. The corn stood taller than me, thick green walls rustling every time the wind came through. The beans had wrapped themselves tight around their poles and each other, and the squash had sprawled out like it had something to prove. From the Willow Trace side, the view they thought they were getting when they bought those houses was gone. No more wide, open meadow. No more imagined walking path with string lights and matching benches. Just crops. Real ones. And I won't lie to you, there was a small, stubborn part of me that enjoyed that. Not because I wanted to punish anyone. Not because I hated the people back there. Most of them were just families who'd been sold a story by a developer with glossy renderings and soft promises. But I did want something to be clear. Open land isn't empty. Quiet land isn't abandoned. And just because someone doesn't use something the way you would doesn't mean it's waiting for you. One Saturday morning, I was out checking irrigation lines when I heard voices at the fence again. Not the usual curious kids this time. Adults. A small cluster of them. I walked over, wiping my hands on my jeans. Brad was there. So was a woman I'd seen jogging most evenings, and an older man with a ball cap pulled low. Brad spoke first. "We need to talk." I leaned against a fence post. "Seems like we've done plenty of that." The jogger woman crossed her arms. "When we bought our house, we were told there would be a green space behind us. A walking trail. That was part of the selling point." "I believe that," I said. "But I didn't tell you that." The older man shook his head. "It's just frustrating. Now we're staring at this." He gestured at the corn like it had personally offended him. "This," I said calmly, "is food." Brad exhaled slow. "You've made your point. That wasn't the goal." "Then what is?" he snapped, and there it was for the first time, a crack in the polished HOA voice. I thought about that for a second. What was the goal? "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about not losing something quietly." The jogger looked confused. "Losing what?" "Control," I said. "Respect. The idea that my land is mine unless I decide otherwise." Brad rubbed his temples. The developer already broke ground on the alternate route. I hadn't heard that yet. I kept my face steady, but inside something loosened. "Alternate route?" I asked. He nodded stiffly. "They're shifting the corridor 10 feet inward on our side. It'll cut into the buffer area behind the last row of houses." The older man muttered something under his breath that sounded like regret. Brad looked at the field again, then back at me. "This could have been easier." "Easier for who?" I asked. He didn't answer. Over the next few weeks, I watched construction equipment move inside Willow Trace instead of along my boundary. The path went in, just narrower than originally planned, hugging their side of the property line. Decorative lights still popped up. Benches still appeared. Families still walked in the evenings. But they walked on their land. The survey stakes on my side disappeared one night without ceremony. No letter. No apology. Just gone. Like they'd never been there. The first time I noticed, I stood in the field again, coffee in hand, just like that first morning. Only this time, there was nothing cutting across the soil except rows of corn and beans swaying in the breeze. I thought I'd feel triumphant, victorious. Instead, I felt steady, like something had clicked into place. Later that summer, when the corn was ready, I picked a few dozen ears and set up a folding table near the road with a simple sign. "Fresh sweet corn. Pay what you want." Some of the Willow Trace residents drove over. A few walked. The jogger woman came by with her kids. She held up an ear of corn and smiled awkwardly. "It's really good," she said. "Glad you think so." She hesitated. "I guess we didn't really think about it from your side." "That happens," I said. Brad never came to the table, but I saw him walking the finished path one evening, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the crops like they were a lesson he hadn't planned on learning. Here's the part that might surprise you. I didn't keep that strip planted forever. After the season ended, after the last squash had been picked and the beans dried out on their vines, I tilled it under again. Not because anyone asked. Not because I'd given up. Because I'd proven what I needed to prove. The next spring, I let wildflowers take over. Native ones. Tall, messy, beautiful in their own way. Not a corridor. Not a park. Just land being land. Sometimes the Willow Trace residents walk along their side and stop to look at the blooms. Sometimes they wave. Sometimes they don't. And that's fine. What changed wasn't just their plan. It was the assumption underneath it. They don't step over the line anymore. And I don't feel the need to build a wall. I've had people tell me I should have sued. Others say I overreacted. That 12 feet isn't worth the trouble. Maybe they're right, depending on how you measure worth. But here's what I know. If I'd let those stakes stay, even for a while, it would have become normal. Temporary becomes permanent faster than you think. A path poured in concrete doesn't disappear just because you finally decide to object. Land doesn't have to be built on to be valuable. It doesn't have to generate income or look pretty in a brochure. Sometimes its value is simply that it's yours, that it represents a boundary someone else doesn't get to redraw because it's convenient. And yeah, maybe I could have handled it differently. Maybe there was a smoother way. But I grew up watching a man regret being too smooth, too agreeable, too willing to let a little strip go. I wasn't going to inherit that regret. So now I'm curious. If you were in my boots, staring at those bright pink flags cutting across your field, what would you have done? Would you have called a lawyer first? Sat down with the HOA board? Let it slide because it was just 12 feet? Or would you have planted something they couldn't ignore? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you land on this. Was it stubborn? Was it justified? Was it both? Share this with someone who's dealt with an HOA or a property line dispute. And let's talk about where the line really is between community and control. And if you believe quiet land still deserves a loud defense sometimes, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. There's always another story growing somewhere.